What did you see on the interception?
What I see, the right read, just slip. You know, it's the right read. It just slipped. So that's what makes me be mad a little bit because of it. But you know, I don't. Any decision I make, I know it's the right decision. I just didn't execute the decision, but the right decision was made. So every day I look and I see about decision making, like how's my decisions I'm making, and that's how I grade myself off of. You know, obviously, turn the ball over and all that stuff is not great. You know, and it won't survive a long time in the league doing that. But as long as my eyes and my feet and everything was in the right place, being able to execute it just may happen. So I look at the positive of things.
Shedeur Sanders threw an interception in his preseason debut, and instead of making excuses, he said something about it that should make every single Browns fan feel better about this entire season. No deflection, no blaming the play call, no hiding from the mistake. Just a direct, honest breakdown of exactly what happened and exactly why it doesn't actually worry him. So here's the real question worth asking heading into next week. If a young quarterback can talk about his own mistake this clearly, this calmly, right after it happens, what does that tell you about how he's going to handle real pressure once the games actually start counting? Stick around, because this post-game conversation reveals a lot more about Shedeur's mindset than the box score from this game ever could. There's a specific way Shedeur describes his own decision-making process that sounds less like a quarterback and more like someone playing an entirely different mental game. There's a genuinely funny moment involving a teammate and a slippery football that turns a costly turnover into a lighthearted inside joke. And there's a comment from head coach Todd Monken himself that backs up exactly what Shedeur was already saying about that interception. Keep watching, because these pieces build into a much bigger picture of where his head is at heading into next week. Let's start with how the game actually opened for him. Shedeur came out firing, connecting on 2 big early passes that got the offense rolling right away. And when asked about the excitement of starting that fast, his answer wasn't what you'd expect from a young player fresh off his preseason debut. And it gets more interesting from there, because he said he doesn't really get excited about big plays anymore. Not because they don't matter, but because of how he started viewing the entire game. Wait, what? Because he compared it directly to chess. If you make this move, the defense responds with that move. For him, it's not about the emotional high of a big completion. It's about making the right decision at the right moment and watching his teammates execute that same read together. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because when asked about the operational side of the game, about communication between him and the offensive line, Shedeur pointed to something specific. The huddle communication was noticeably faster and cleaner than what he'd been used to, with far less miscommunication about what plays were actually being called. We'll come back to why that specific detail matters so much heading into next week's evaluation. But first, you need to hear exactly how Shedeur explained his one interception, because it's a masterclass in accountability without excuse making. Let's actually sit with that communication detail for a second, because it's easy to gloss over, and it shouldn't be. Shedeur specifically mentioned that stepping out of the huddle after a play call, there was no confusion between what the offensive line heard and what he actually said. That might sound like a small operational detail, but miscommunication at the line of scrimmage is exactly the kind of invisible problem that turns into blown protections, missed blocking assignments, and unnecessary pressure on a quarterback. A cleaner, faster operation means fewer of those hidden errors compounding into bigger problems on tape. That's not flashy, but it's foundational, and it's exactly the kind of detail that experienced coaches pay attention to even when it doesn't show up directly in a box score.
I look at the positive of things, you know. I'm alive, I'm breathing. I'm able to come up here and talk to y'all, so, you know, I can't be that down.
Todd said the same thing. He said he thought you and Dylan on the interception both had the right read, just for some reason, like the execution was a little off. It sounds like is that pretty encouraging for you at the second? Like, you probably have faith you're going to be able to execute most of the time. It's about the decision making, probably.
No, we definitely want to execute, so we don't want to make that a habit. But you know, it may happen. Yeah. Overall, we both felt the same thing. The ball was a little sandy, so that was just a moment just to laugh at, you know, between us, honestly. Because it was the right decision. I talked to him when he got to the sideline. I said, "Hey, what happened, man?" Oh, my father, I said, hey, what happened? He's like, bro, the ball's sandy. I said, bro, I know the ball's sandy.
Because right when a reporter asked him directly what happened on the interception, Shedeur gave an answer that should completely change how people think about his decision-making. He said the read itself was correct. It just slipped out of his hand. Think about the distinction he's drawing there. He wasn't saying the coverage confused him. He wasn't blaming a receiver's route. He was making a clear, specific separation between the decision and the execution, and he was honest enough to admit that the frustrating part wasn't the read, it was simply losing grip on the ball at the wrong moment. And he didn't stop there. He explained that every single day, he grades himself specifically on the quality of his decisions, not just the outcome. Because turning the ball over is genuinely bad and won't be tolerated long-term in this league, but as long as his eyes, his feet, and his overall process were in the right place, he can live with an execution mistake a lot easier than a mental one. That's where this moment gets genuinely revealing. Because that's an incredibly mature framework for a young quarterback to already have internalized. A lot of players conflate every mistake into one big pile of bad play. Shedeur is already sorting his mistakes by category, decision-making versus physical execution, and grading himself specifically on the part that's actually within his control. Now, if that's all there was to this story, it would already say a lot about his mindset. But it gets deeper, because there was a genuinely funny moment buried inside this serious breakdown. Shedeur revealed that immediately after the interception, he went over to the teammate involved, and they shared a laugh about it, both agreeing the ball had simply gotten slick in the moment. That small detail matters because it shows a level of composure that doesn't waste emotional energy dwelling on a mistake once it's already happened. And here's the detail that should completely validate everything Shedeur was already saying about that play. Because head coach Todd Monken reportedly backed up that exact same read, saying he believed both quarterbacks who had similar plays that day made the right read, and it simply came down to execution rather than a mental error. When your own head coach is independently confirming the same breakdown you just gave in the press conference, that's not spin. That's an accurate self-assessment. There's another piece of this conversation worth digging into because it explains a lot about why his processing speed already looks sharper than a typical second-year player. Shedeur talked directly about how real game experience from last season, combined with actual film study, has made his post-snap recognition noticeably faster. He described it almost like a two-step process. First, you have to think through what you're seeing, and only after that can you actually execute on it. The gap between those two steps is exactly what separates hesitant quarterbacks from decisive ones, and he credited last year's live reps specifically for shrinking that gap. That's not something you can fake or manufacture in a press conference. Either the tape shows a quarterback recognizing coverages quickly, or it doesn't, and by his own account, that recognition has genuinely sped up heading into this season. He also pointed directly to what he considered his best throw of the game, and it wasn't a flashy deep ball. It was a simple check down to his running back in a red zone, made specifically because he correctly diagnosed a certain coverage look before the snap. What stood out about how he described that play wasn't the throw itself, but the credit he gave to his entire offensive line for communicating the down and distance situation to him in real time. He was explicit about it being a team effort, not an individual accomplishment, tying it directly back to everyone on that offense thinking through the same information together. Now, let's talk about what comes next, because Shedeur made it clear he's not treating this preseason debut as some kind of final exam. When asked about splitting first-team reps with Deshaun Watson heading into the Bills game, his answer was refreshingly simple. He's just excited to get more reps, period. He talked about loving the opportunity to actually see the game in person, to recognize things in real time rather than just studying them on film, calling it a completely new perspective that he's genuinely happy to have. Now here's my hottest take on this entire story. This press conference is proof that Shedeur Sanders isn't approaching this competition emotionally. He's approaching it like a process, breaking every single rep down into decision quality versus execution quality, taking accountability without spiraling, and staying excited about opportunity instead of anxious about evaluation. That's exactly the kind of mental framework that holds up under pressure, and it's exactly the kind of framework that's easy to miss if you're only looking at his stat line from one preseason game. And that's precisely why Browns fans should be encouraged heading into next week. A player who can already separate the controllable from the uncontrollable, who takes ownership without letting a mistake shake his confidence, is a player who's built for the long, grinding evaluation process still ahead of him. To recap, Shedeur Sanders took full accountability for his one interception against the Bears, drawing a clear line between a correct read and a simple execution slip, a read that Todd Monken independently confirmed after the game. He also revealed a chess-like approach to decision-making and expressed genuine excitement, not anxiety, about splitting reps with Deshaun Watson heading into the Bills matchup. My prediction? The more reps Shedeur gets under this exact mindset, the harder it's going to become for anyone to argue he isn't ready for whatever role this coaching staff eventually hands him. Drop a comment. Do you think this level of self-accountability after one interception is exactly what Browns fans should want to see from their potential franchise quarterback? This is Gridiron Insights. We'll see you in the next one.